I have stood a great many posts in the years since, and I have learned to tell the good ones from the bad by a single sign. On a good post, nothing happens. On the afternoon the young prince vanished, I was 3 months a king's guard, barely trusted to hold a wall, and I still believed that the busiest days were the best ones. I know better now. The day the whole of Harrowgate turned itself inside out looking for a boy of 10 began as the finest day I had ever worked, and I have never forgotten how quickly a fine day can become the worst hour of your life. It was the Queen's open day. Once a year, in the Kingdom of Eldermoor, good Queen Saralind of the Royal House of Harrowgate threw the palace grounds wide, and let the ordinary people of the realm walk where only lords and footmen usually walked. Families came by the thousand. Children pressed their faces to the gilded railings they had only ever seen from the road. There were long trestle tables of bread and honey, a brass band on the south lawn, jugglers by the fountain, and that year, in the great glass orangery at the eastern edge of the gardens, a stage had been raised for a traveling company of players and conjurors who had been engaged to perform for the little ones. The orangery was the jewel of it. You have not seen anything like it. Imagine a cathedral built of glass and white-painted iron, 3 stories high, filled the year round with orange trees in enormous stone tubs, palms taller than a man on horseback, and the smell, oh, the smell of it, citrus and warm earth and green growing things, all under a roof of glass that turned the afternoon sun to gold. On open day they cleared the central avenue of the orangery, set 200 small chairs in rows, built a low stage at the north end with a painted backdrop of stars, and let the children of Eldermoor sit where princes usually walked. I was posted at the orangery's western service door. It is not a glamorous post. The western door is where the deliveries come, the wine and the linen and the crates of props, wheeled in on hand carts from the yard beyond. My orders were plain: hold the door, admit only those on the day's manifest, and above all keep my eyes on the room. Corporal Wrenfield had told me that himself, that morning in the guardroom, buckling my chin-strap tighter than I would have and looking at me the way an old dog looks at a young one. "Eyes on the room, Aldous," he said. "Not on the show, never on the show is for them." He nodded, meaning the children. "You are for the room." I did not fully understand him then. Corporal Wrenfield was a lean, gray, unhurried man, perhaps 50, with a face like a closed door and hands that never fidgeted. He had served the House of Harrowgate for 29 years, and there was a story that he had once stood a post through a lightning strike that split the flagpole above his head and never so much as blinked. The younger guards were a little afraid of him and a great deal in awe. I had spoken maybe 40 words to him in 3 months. He was to stand the eastern service door that afternoon, directly across the great room from me, and between us, in the golden light, sat 200 children and their mothers, and somewhere among them in the second row sat Prince Joran. I had never been so near to royalty. He was 10 years old, the Queen's son, and if you had not been told, he was a prince you would have taken him for any bright boy in a good coat, brown hair that would not lie flat, a gap where a tooth had lately come out, and a way of leaning forward in his seat with his whole body when something interested him. His younger sister, the Princess Malin, who was about 8, sat beside him gripping a paper windmill, and behind them sat their governess, a kind, round woman named Mistress Pell, and 2 of the household ladies, and because the Queen would not have her children fenced off from her people on the one day the people came, no more guard than that. The Prince Consort, Aldrich, had looked in earlier and gone off to the south lawn to hear the band. The Queen herself was to come at the end, to thank the players. It was, everyone agreed, a perfectly ordinary, perfectly happy arrangement. The company that performed called themselves the Marvel Brothers, though I do not think any of them were brothers, and I doubt the name Marvel was on any of their birth papers. There were 6 or 7 of them, a tumbler in motley, a woman who sang, a fellow with a monkey that turned out to be a very good puppet. and the star of them the conjuror, a tall, smiling man in a green coat sewn all over with little mirrors, who called himself the astonishing Corvin and who could, I will grant him, make a dove appear from an empty hat, and a silver coin walk across his own knuckles as if it were alive. The children adored him. When he asked, in his warm, carrying voice, whether any brave young person in the audience would come up and be his assistant for the great trick, 200 small hands shot into the air, and the loudest, most eager, most forward of all of them, leaning half out of his seat, waving both arms, was the boy in the second row with the gap in his teeth. I saw it happen. I want that understood, because much was said afterward about how a prince could be taken from a room full of people with 2 king's guards in it, and the honest answer is that nothing was taken. Not then. The astonishing Corvin looked out over that sea of hands, and his eye, I would swear it, though I could not prove it, his eye found the second row and stayed there half a heartbeat too long before he laughed and pointed and said, "You, young sir. Yes, you the brave one, come up, come up." And Prince Joran was out of his seat and up the 2 steps to the stage before Mistress Pell had half risen, and the whole room laughed and clapped, and I clapped too. God help me, because it was a delight to see, and my orders were eyes on the room, and I thought, a boy on a stage in front of 200 people is the safest boy in Eldermoor. That was the last easy breath I took for a long while. The great trick was the Vanishing Cabinet. Corvin's people wheeled it out, a tall lacquered box, black and gold, painted with stars to match the backdrop, on 4 brass casters, with a door in front, and I would later learn, a great deal more to it than a door. The conjurer made a show of it. He rapped every side with his knuckles to prove it solid. He had the prince step inside and wave to his sister through the closing door. Malin waved her windmill back, and then Corvin drew a spangled curtain across the whole cabinet, said his words, 3 of them in a language that was no language, fired a little flash of powder that made the whole front row shriek with joy, and swept the curtain aside. The cabinet stood open and empty. The prince was gone. The children screamed with delight, wait for it, any moment now. And this second time, too, the room laughed a little less certainly, because a good trick knows when to end, and this one had gone 1 beat past its ending. Corvin's smile did not falter, but something behind it did. I was watching the room as I had been told, and so I was watching him, and I saw the exact instant the showman's face and the man's face came apart. He turned to the wings, where his tumbler and his singing woman stood, and he said something to them that the audience could not hear over their own chatter, and the tumbler's answer was a shake of the head. A small, private, appalled shake of the head, the kind of gesture a man makes when the thing he is being asked has already gone wrong. Mistress Pell rose from her chair. She was smiling still, the polite fixed smile of a woman who does not yet know she is frightened. "Joran," she said, and it was not loud, but I heard it because I had begun, without knowing why, to move toward the stage. "Joran, that will do now. Come down, sweetheart." The cabinet gave no boy. Corvin went to it himself. He opened the false back. There was a false back, of course, a panel that swung to a narrow standing space behind the painted stars, where a small assistant could crouch unseen while the audience gaped at an empty box. That space was where the prince should have been. That space was where every vanished assistant in the history of the trick had waited, breathing quietly, for the curtain to sweep back a 3rd time and reveal him again to a roar of wonder. The space was empty, and I saw Corvin's hand come out of that empty space, and I saw it was shaking, and in that moment I understood, 3 months a guard and green as spring grass, that the trick had a first half and no second half, that a boy had gone into a box in front of 200 people and simply not been there to come out, and that the boy was the Queen's son. I have tried many times to describe the next few minutes, and I have never done it well, because they were not minutes of thought. They were minutes of noise. Mistress Pell's polite smile broke all at once into something raw, and she cried the prince's name in a voice that cut across the whole glass room, and 200 children who had been laughing went silent the way a wave goes silent the instant before it breaks. And then the mothers understood, and the sound that came up out of that orangery was like nothing I have heard before or since. The household ladies were on their feet. Little Princess Malin was screaming for her brother, her paper windmill fallen and trodden. Corvin was tearing the cabinet apart with his own hands, throwing the painted panels down, as though the prince might be folded somewhere inside the very wood, and the tumbler had bolted for the wings. And everywhere, people were rising and turning and calling out and pressing toward the stage, 200 chairs scraping and toppling, so that the one thing you would need in that moment, a clear floor, a still room, a set of tracks not yet trampled, dissolved into chaos in the space of 10 heartbeats. I did what I had been trained to do, which was to shout for the door I held to be sealed, and I sealed it, and I stood in it, and I felt like a fool, because sealing a door does no good against a boy who has already gone. And across that whole boiling room, at the eastern service door, one man had not moved. Corporal Wrenfield stood exactly where he had been posted. He had not run to the stage. He had not drawn a weapon. He had not so much as taken a step. His rifle was at his shoulder and his eyes were forward, and his face was the same closed door it had always been. And for one furious instant I hated him for it. The whole world had caught fire, and the old man was standing his post like a painted soldier, while a child of the house he had served for 29 years was gone. I remember thinking, "Move, you cold old fool, do something." He was doing something. I did not understand it yet, but he was doing the only thing worth doing in that room, and it was the thing I had been told to do that very morning and had already forgotten. He was watching. While Mistress Pell wept and Corvin ripped his cabinet to splinters and 200 people churned the floor to trampled ruin, Corporal Wrenfield stood motionless at the eastern door and let his gray eyes travel the room, slow and steady, corner to corner, floor to roof, the way a man reads a page he means to remember. He was not looking where everyone was looking. Everyone was looking at the empty cabinet, at the hole where the boy had been. Wrenfield was looking at everything else, at the floor, at the doors, at the way the light fell, at the things a room keeps even after the person in it is gone. And then, while the whole household began to pour into the orangery, footmen, then more guards, then an officer of the palace bellowing for the gates to be shut, Corporal Wrenfield turned his head a few degrees and looked down, and looked at the floor near the eastern door, at a length of polished parquet that ran back toward the yard, and he went very still in a new way. Not the still of standing a post, the still of a man who has just seen something. I did not know what he had seen. I would not know for a while yet. But I have thought about it every day of my life since, that small turn of a gray head in a room gone mad, because everything that came after, the boy alive, the plot undone, the whole terrible afternoon turned right, everything hung on the fact that while 200 people looked at the empty box, one old guard was looking at the floor. The palace answered the way a great house answers an alarm, with weight, and with noise, and with a great many men who all knew exactly what to do and all did it at once. Within a quarter of an hour the orangery had 100 people in it, and none of them the one that mattered. The gates were shut. The open-day crowds, 10,000 souls who had come to see the Queen's gardens, were sealed inside those gardens and told, gently and then not so gently, that no one would leave until a lost child was found, and a groan went through them, and mothers clutched their own children closer, and the fine bright day curdled. I should tell you what an alarm like that does to a great house, because until you have stood inside one you cannot imagine it. Word of a lost prince does not travel like ordinary news. It travels like fire in dry grass, and it changes everyone it touches. Within minutes the brass band on the south lawn had fallen silent mid-tune. Someone had run to them and told them, and the music simply stopped, a dropped chord hanging in the air, and 10,000 people who had come for a holiday looked up from their picnics and their games, and felt the day go wrong without yet knowing why. The prince consort, Aldrich, came at a dead run from the south lawn with his coat flying, calling his son's name, and had to be caught and steadied by 2 footmen at the orangery door, because a man does not think clearly when it is his own child. And I saw in his white ruined face the thing that made Wrenfield's calm so precious. Everyone who loved the boy was, in that moment, useless to him, because love without discipline is only fear wearing a kinder coat. The bells began then, the great alarm bells of Harrowgate, which I had heard rung only for drills and for the old king's death, and which every soul in Eldermoor knew meant something had gone very wrong at the palace. They rolled out over the gardens and the town and the river, deep and terrible, and under them the open-day crowds began to press toward the gates, and the gates were shut against them, and for a few ugly minutes there was danger of a crush, 10,000 frightened people and a locked palace, until the officers got among them and calmed it. All of this, the stopped music, the running father, the tolling bells, the sealed and frightened crowd, all of it happened in the first 10 minutes, and all of it was noise, and none of it found the boy, and I have never forgotten the lesson buried in that. That when a thing goes truly wrong, the whole world's first response is sound, and sound is not the same as help, and the man who can stay silent and think while the bells are ringing is worth more than 100 who can only run and shout. The man who took command was Captain Havard of the Palace Guard, and I will say for him that he was brave and quick, and that he loved the house. I will also say that he was, in the first hour, entirely wrong, and that he was wrong in the way clever men are usually wrong, which is by being too sure of the obvious. Captain Havard looked at the empty cabinet, and he looked at the Marvel brothers, and he drew the straight line between them, and he was not foolish to do so. He had the whole company seized on the spot, Corvin and his tumbler and his singing woman and his puppet man, all of them held in the orangery under guard, white-faced and protesting. He had the cabinet carried off to be broken down entirely. He had every player's cart and case turned out onto the gravel and searched to the seams. "He is inside something of theirs," Havard said, striding certain. "A trunk, a hamper, a false floor in a wagon. These people vanish children for a living. They have him packed away, and they mean to walk him out through the yard when the fuss dies. Seal the yard, search every case twice, search the players themselves." And to Corvin, seizing the green coat by its mirrored lapel, "Where is the boy? Where have you put the Queen's son?" And Corvin, I watched his face, because Wrenfield had taught me that morning without my knowing I had learned it to watch faces. Corvin was not the face of a man who has hidden a prize and is playing for time. Corvin was the face of a man watching his own life end for a thing he did not do. "I don't know," he kept saying, and there was a crack down the middle of the words. "I don't know, I don't know. He went into the cabinet. He was to crouch behind the false back. My girl was to hand him out at the finish, my assistant, my little assistant. She does it every show," and here he stopped, and a new horror crossed his face, and he looked wildly about the orangery, and he said, "Where is Ninette? Where is my assistant? Where is she?" No one could find the girl. That was the first thread, and Captain Havard, to his credit, seized it, but he seized it the wrong way. He took it to mean the girl was in on the theft, an accomplice fled, and he sent men roaring off to search the grounds for a girl of perhaps 12 in a spangled costume, and he doubled the guard on Corvin, certain now that the conjuror had used his own young assistant to carry the prince away. It was a reasonable line. It was the line the evidence in the room seemed to draw. And it was pointed in precisely the wrong direction, and it cost us, I think, the better part of an hour that a lost child could ill afford. Through all of it, Corporal Wrenfield had left his post. This is worth saying, because a king's guard does not leave his post, and Wrenfield in 29 years was said never to have left one that was not properly relieved. But when Captain Havard's men flooded the eastern door and made the post meaningless, Wrenfield stepped back from it, slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything, and he crouched down. An old man in a red tunic and a tall bearskin, going down on one knee on the polished floor by the eastern service door, in the middle of all that shouting, and putting his gloved fingertips very lightly to the parquet, and looking along it, cheek almost to the wood, the way you might sight along the edge of a table to see if it is true. I had abandoned my own sealed door by then. There were 4 men on it, and I had drifted toward him, drawn by I could not have said what. I was the only one watching him. Everyone else was watching Havard tear the players' wagons apart. "Corporal," I said. "Sir, what is it?" He did not look up. "Casters," he said. I did not understand. "Sir." The cabinet ran on brass casters, 4 of them. Soft brass, and a floor waxed this morning for the Queen's own eyes. He drew a gloved finger along the wood, not quite touching, tracing something I could not yet see. A thing on casters, rolled across a fresh waxed floor, leaves 4 lines. Fine ones. You would not see them unless the light was low and you were looking, and no one is looking because the boy is not on the floor, the boy is in the box, and the box is on the stage. He turned his head and looked up at me at last, and his gray eyes were perfectly calm, and that calm frightened me more than all the screaming had. "So, the cabinet came out from the wings there and went to the stage there, and those 4 lines run true between the 2. Good. Now look here." I got down beside him, my knees on the cold parquet, and I looked where his gloved finger hovered, and at first I saw nothing, and then the golden light shifted as a cloud moved over the glass roof far above, and I saw them. 4 faint parallel lines in the wax, casters, running not from the wings to the stage, but from the stage past where we knelt, straight to the eastern service door, and out of it, toward the yard. "There were 2 journeys," Wrenfield said quietly. "Everyone saw the first. The cabinet came out to the stage. Nobody watched the second, the cabinet, or something the size and weight of it, going back out the eastern door, while every eye in this room was on an empty box and a weeping woman. These lines are fresher than the others. Look how sharp the edges are. They were laid down within the hour, within the half-hour." He rose, unhurried, brushing wax dust from his glove. "The boy did not vanish, Aldous. He was wheeled out, and not by the players, who are all still here being shouted at, by someone who wanted us to spend our hour tearing the players apart while the wheels rolled the other way. I ran to fetch Captain Havard, and this is the part I am least proud of, because I ran to fetch him certain he would come, and he did not come. I found him in the yard, up to his elbows in a wardrobe hamper, and I told him, breathless, tumbling the words, that Corporal Wrenfield had found caster tracks running out the eastern door, that the cabinet or another like it had been wheeled toward the yard, that the boy might have gone out that way while we searched the players. And Captain Havard straightened up with a length of spangled costume in his fist, and looked at me the way a busy man looks at a boy who is wasting his time. "Tracks in the wax," he said. "Corporal Wrenfield sees tracks in the wax. He was not cruel. He was only certain, and certainty is a kind of deafness. Son, the floor of that room has had 200 chairs and 500 feet dragged across it in the last 10 minutes. There are 1,000 tracks in that wax. I have the whole company in hand, and a missing accomplice, and a cabinet built to hide a person. I know where the boy is. He is in one of these cases, or he is on the back of one of these people, and I will find him, and I will not send men chasing an old sentry's shadows in the yard while I do it." He turned back to the hamper. "Tell Wrenfield to go back to his post. Tell him the palace thanks him." I went back with my face burning. I found Wrenfield already at the eastern door, already outside it, for the tracks did not stop at the threshold. They crossed it, out onto the flagstones of the covered walk that ran from the orangery to the service yard, 4 faint bright scratches on stone that had been swept and sanded that morning, and was already in the trampling half spoiled. He was following them the way a hound follows a line, slow, patient, unbothered by the fact that I brought Havard's refusal. "He won't send men," I said. "He says there are 1,000 tracks. He says go back to your post. He says the palace thanks you." I was near tears with the shame of it. "Sir, he's wrong. I know he's wrong. Why won't he see it?" Wrenfield did not stop walking the line. "Because he is looking for the boy," he said, "and I am looking for the man who took the boy. Havard wants to open a box and find a child inside it. That is the answer that ends the fear the fastest, and so it is the answer he wants to be true, and a man will chase the answer he wants a long way past the point where the floor is telling him something else. He crouched again where the flagstones met the yard gate. It is not a fault in him. It is only a thing to watch for in yourself. The floor does not want anything. That is why the floor is worth listening to. And there at the yard gate, the floor gave up its second word. It was caught in the iron scrollwork at the base of the gate, a scrap of stiff paper, torn at one corner, snagged where it had fluttered and stuck. Wrenfield freed it with two gloved fingers, gentle as lifting a moth, and turned it to the light, and I looked over his shoulder, and my heart went cold and then hot. It was a corner torn from an open day program. The little printed card every visitor had been given at the gates, a map of the gardens on one side and the day's amusements on the other. 10,000 of them had been handed out. It was the least remarkable object in Eldermoor. But on the back of this one, in the white margin, in a round, careful child's hand that had clearly been practicing, was written a single word, half of it torn away with the missing corner. What remained was Jora. He had signed his program, of course he had. A boy of 10, on the grandest day of his year, given a printed card of his own. He had written his name on it in his best round letters, the way a boy does, Joran, proud of every stroke, and somewhere between his seat in the second row and this iron gate at the mouth of the service yard, the card had been in his hand or his pocket, and here it was, torn and snagged, exactly where the caster tracks ran out through the gate and into the yard beyond. He came this way, I breathed. He was here. He was alive and holding this, and he came this way. He came this way within the hour, Wrenfield agreed, and he tucked the torn card carefully inside his tunic, against his heart, where it would not be lost. He stood and looked through the bars of the yard gate at the service yard beyond, the long cobbled space where the deliveries came and went, where the vans and drays of open day were drawn up in their rows, where the whole commerce of feeding and dressing a palace on its busiest day was carried on out of sight of the pretty lawns, and I saw him count them with his eyes. The vans, the drays, the gate at the far end that led onto the tradesmen's road, and past that the whole wide kingdom. Now the question is not where he went, Wrenfield said. It is how fast and in what. A grown man cannot carry a struggling boy of 10 across a busy yard in daylight without 100 eyes seeing it. But a man wheeling a large lacquered box on brass casters on the busiest delivery day of the year, in a yard full of men wheeling large boxes, no one sees that at all. No one sees the thing they expect to see. He turned to me, and for the first time that afternoon something moved in the closed door of his face, not fear, but a kind of grim urgency. Aldous, the vans, which of them have left the yard since the show began? The yard master was a broad, worried man named Gostard who kept the delivery ledger, and I had never in my life been so glad of a man who wrote everything down. Wrenfield went to him, walked, did not run, though every nerve in me was screaming to run, and asked, in a voice as level as a table, for the ledger of everything that had come and gone through the tradesmen's gate since noon. Gostard, who had heard the alarm bells and seen the guards flooding the grounds and did not yet know what he was caught in the middle of, handed it over with shaking hands. Wrenfield read it the way he read a floor, slow, complete, his gloved finger going down the wet ink lines, the linen carts come and gone, the wine delivered at 11 and the empties away at 1, the ice, the flowers, and there near the bottom 2 entries that made his finger stop. A florist's van, he read aloud. Entered at 1:30 to remove the spent arrangements from the morning reception. Departed at, his finger moved, departed at 3:17. He looked up. The show began at 3. The prince went into the cabinet at perhaps 12 minutes past. This van rolled out of the yard 5 minutes later. He set the ledger down on Gostard's counter with great care, as though it were something that might break. A florist's van, come to take away dead flowers, that arrived before the show and left 5 minutes into it. Master Gostard, do you know the man who drove it? Gostard's face had gone the color of tallow. No, sir, he had the papers. The right papers, the palace stamp, the order for the reception flowers, I checked them myself. I always check, his voice climbed. He was new. The regular florist's man is old Tam. I know old Tam 30 years. This one said Tam was poorly and he was sent in his place. It happens. On open day it happens a dozen times, everyone short-handed, sending nephews and neighbors. What did he take away? Flowers, sir. Spent flowers in the tall flower crates. The ones near as high as a man, on the little wheeled frames for the great arrangements, and Gostard stopped, and his mouth stayed open, and I watched the same cold understanding go through him that had gone through me at the yard gate. A tall crate on a wheeled frame, near as high as a man. On brass casters, perhaps, that would leave 4 faint lines in fresh wax, and 4 faint scratches on sanded stone. He took away 2 crates, Gostard whispered. He came in with the van near empty and he went out with 2 tall crates. I helped him load the first myself. It was full of dead lilies. I saw them, brown at the edges. The second he loaded himself, would not let me touch it, said the last arrangement was the Queen's own and mustn't be jostled by rough hands. He put his own rough hand over his mouth. God forgive me. God forgive me. I held the gate for him and waved him through. It was there, in the space of a breath, that the whole shape of the thing turned over and showed us its underside, and I understood at last why Wrenfield had been so sure and Havard so wrong. This had not been a trick gone wrong. This had been a plan gone exactly right. Someone had studied the open day for weeks. Someone had learned that the conjurer's great trick put a child into a box in front of a distracted crowd. Someone had put a man inside the palace walls with forged flower papers and a van and 2 tall crates, one full of real dead flowers to satisfy a curious eye, and one empty, waiting. And someone, somewhere between the wings and the false back of that cabinet, had taken the boy who crouched in the dark expecting to be handed back out to applause, and had carried or coaxed him the few short steps to a waiting crate on wheels, and rolled him out the eastern door while 200 people watched an empty box and laughed. Which meant there had been a hand inside the show. The tumbler's appalled shake of the head. Corvin's missing assistant, the girl Ninette, 12 years old and nowhere to be found. Not an accomplice fled with the prize, Havard had that exactly backward, but a child herself, perhaps, taken as well, or frightened into silence, or lured off with the same soft promises. I did not know which, and neither yet did Wrenfield. But we both knew now that the boy was not in the orangery, was not in a player's hamper, was not on the grounds at all. He was in a florist's van that had rolled out of the tradesman's gate at 17 minutes past 3, and it was now. Wrenfield looked at the great clock on the stable tower. It was now 4:45. The van had an hour and a half start, and a kingdom to disappear into. It was in that same terrible minute that the Queen came into the yard. No one had wanted to tell her. That is the truth of it. A household full of brave men, and every one of them had found a reason to be busy elsewhere rather than be the one to walk up to good Queen Saralind and say the words her son is gone. But she was not a woman who could be kept from a thing by other people's cowardice, and she had come down from the palace at the first bell, and she had gone first to the orangery, and found the wrecked stage and the weeping governess and the empty splintered cabinet, and then she had followed the noise and the running men out to the service yard, and she came through the tradesman's gate on foot, alone, still in the pale silk she had meant to thank the players in. And she stopped in the middle of that yard full of turned-out hampers and shouting soldiers, and the whole of it fell silent around her. I had never been so near her. She was not weeping. I think that was the worst of it. Her face had gone perfectly white and perfectly still, a stillness I recognized. God help me, because it was Wrenfield's own, the stillness of a person holding a thing that would break them if they let it move. And she looked at the chaos of her yard and she said, in a voice that did not shake because she would not let it, "Where is my son? Someone will tell me where my son is. Now." And it was Corporal Wrenfield who answered her, not Captain Havard, who stood with a costume in his fist and his certainties coming apart in his hands and no words at all. The old corporal stepped forward and came to attention and said, plainly, without softening it and without dressing it, because he had judged in one look that this was a woman who would be helped by the truth and destroyed by comfortable lies. He was carried out of the orangery in a flower crate, Your Majesty, within minutes of the trick, on a florist's van that left this yard at 17 minutes past 3. He is alive. A man does not take this trouble to steal a boy he means to harm. He has taken him to keep, and a boy kept is a boy kept whole. I have read the sign myself. I know the van, the horse, and the road. With your leave, I will go after him now this minute, while the trail is warm, and I will bring your son home. I watched the Queen take that in. I watched her weigh the old man, the way the powerful learn to weigh a person in a heartbeat, and I watched her decide, in the space it takes to draw one breath, that here at last was someone who was not managing her, not soothing her, not chasing the answer that felt best, but simply telling her what was true and what he meant to do about it. And she did a thing that I think shocked Captain Havard more than anything else that terrible day. She turned to her own captain and she said, "Give this man whatever he asks. Horses, riders, my own seal if he needs it. And do not," her voice caught once and steadied, "do not let anyone stop him to argue. There has been enough arguing. Go, Corporal, go now. Bring him back to me." "I will, Your Majesty," said Wrenfield, and he did not say it as a hope. He said it as a fact not yet arrived, the way a man states the hour, and something in the plain iron certainty of it put the first color back into the Queen's white face. Then he turned from her, and there was no more ceremony in him at all, only the work. I have never seen a man do a frightening thing as calmly as Corporal Wrenfield did the next one. He did not shout. He did not run for Havard again. He had learned in one refusal that Havard would not be turned, and he did not waste a second breath on it. He simply took command, a corporal of the guard, with no authority to command anyone above a private soldier, took command by the sheer plain force of knowing what to do while everyone around him did not. "Master Gostard," he said, "the florist's van, what color, what marks, what horse?" "Green," Gostard stammered, "dark green, with a spray of painted roses on the side and the name Fenimore and daughter in gold, and a bay horse with one white sock, the near fore." "Which road from the tradesman's gate?" There is only the one, sir. It runs down to the river road, and then you may go east to the town or west to the bridges." "How long to the fork?" 20 minutes at a walk. Less if he push the horse, but a man does not push a flower horse. It draws eyes. "A man who has just stolen a prince," said Wrenfield, "draws his eyes exactly as long as he dares and not one moment longer. He walked that horse through this yard so no one would look twice. He will walk it to the fork, and then he will choose." He turned to me, and his gray eyes had gone very bright and very hard. "Aldous, can you ride?" I could ride. I had grown up on a farm at the edge of the moor, and I had sat a horse before I could properly walk, and I told him so, and I have never been gladder of anything I could tell a man. Wrenfield went to the stable line at a fast walk that was almost a run, and he did a second frightening, quiet thing. He sent word to Havard at last, but not a plea this time. He sent a groom sprinting with a message stripped down to what could not be argued with. "Green florist's van, Fenimore and daughter, bay horse, white near fore sock. Left the tradesman's gate 17 minutes past 3. The prince is in it. We have gone after it on the river road. Send riders to the fork." He did not ask Havard to believe him. He simply told him where the boy was, and left the believing to catch up on its own time. And then he swung himself up onto a palace horse with an ease that took 30 years off him, and I scrambled up onto another, and we went out through the tradesman's gate at a canter that scattered the astonished delivery men before us like pigeons. The river road ran flat and straight and empty in the long gold light of the late afternoon. An hour and a half is a long start. I knew that, and Wrenfield knew it better, and neither of us said it. We rode. The palace fell away behind us, its glass orangery flashing once in the sun like a struck match, and ahead the road ran down toward the water between hedges heavy with the year's first blossom, and we watched the road the way Wrenfield watched a floor, for anything that did not belong. A dropped glove, a wheel mark swerving off onto the verge, the particular green of a florist's van. He talked as we rode, low and even, and I understood that he was thinking aloud and letting me hear it because I was the only pair of ears he had. "He will not run straight for a boarder with a stolen prince," Wrenfield said. "That is a fool's play, and this is no fool." A green van with gold letters is the most looked-at thing on the road the moment the alarm goes wide, and he knows the alarm will go wide. So he does not mean to be in the green van long. He means to change. He nodded at the road ahead. Somewhere near the fork, out of sight of the palace and before the toll on the bridges, he leaves the van, moves the boy to something plain, a farm cart, a plain trap, a boat, even, and sends the green van on empty or off down the wrong road for us to chase. He wants us to find the van. He wants us to find it empty at the end of a wrong road so that we spend the last of the daylight staring at dead lilies while he walks a quiet child down a quiet lane in the other direction. He glanced at me. "So when we find the van, and we will find the van, we do not stop chasing. Finding the van is the trap. You understand? The relief you will feel when you see it will be the most dangerous feeling of the whole day. Do not trust it." We nearly lost him twice before the fork, and both times it was Wrenfield's eyes that held the line where mine failed. The first was at a crossroads where the river road met a lane running up to a mill, and I would have gone straight on, because straight on is what a man does. But Wrenfield reined in hard and sat his horse still in the middle of the crossing, and looked at the dust for the space of 10 heartbeats, while my whole body screamed that we were wasting the light. "Here," he said at last, and pointed with his chin. A cart turned up the mill lane and came back. See the 2 sets of wheel marks, one over the other, going up and returning. A man testing whether the lane was watched. He went up, saw the mill was busy, and came back to the river road. He is being careful. Careful is slow. Careful is good for us. And he touched his heels to the horse, and we went on. And I understood that even a wrong turning, read rightly, was a thing that told you the man's mind. That Wrenfield was not only following the tracks but following the fear in the man who made them. And a frightened, careful man is a slower quarry than a bold one. The second was worse. 100 yards on, the road forded a shallow stream, and beyond the ford the surface turned to hard-packed gravel that took no mark at all, and the tracks simply stopped, as though the van had lifted into the air. I felt the despair come up in me like cold water, but Wrenfield did not even slow. He rode straight across the gravel to where it gave way to soft verge again on the far side, swung down, and within a moment had found what he was looking for. A single crushed clump of the year's first cow parsley, snapped off at the root and flung onto the verge, wilting. A horse cropped that as it passed, and the driver hauled its head up sharp. "See the tear. Not a clean bite," he said. "He came this way not a half-hour gone. The flowers are only now beginning to wilt." He was up again and riding before I had finished gaping. "You will learn, Aldous, that the ground remembers everything and forgets it slowly, and that a man who thinks he leaves no trace leaves a dozen, and the only skill is patience enough to read them. Havard is a fine officer, and he will make general one day, and he will still be looking at the box while better men look at the floor. It is not cleverness. Any fool can be clever. It is only that I decided, 30 years ago, to look at what everyone else has already decided is empty." That was the most I had ever heard him say at once, and I have kept every word of it, and I have passed it on to younger men than I was that day, and I will pass it on again before I am done. I did not fully believe him about the van, though. I wanted so badly for finding the van to be the end. And when we came round the long bend before the fork and I saw it dark green, a spray of painted roses, Fenimore and daughter in flaking gold, drawn up crooked in the mouth of a farm track with the bay horse cropping the hedge and no driver anywhere, I felt exactly the flood of relief he had warned me of, and for one dizzy moment I was certain the boy was inside and safe, and it was over. It was not over. The van was empty. We came off our horses, and I tore the back of it open, and there they were, the 2 tall flower crates tipped on their sides, one still half full of brown lilies, and the other empty, its lid thrown back. A scatter of straw in the bottom of it, and pressed into the straw, small and unmistakable, the shape where a curled-up person the size of a boy of 10 had lately lain. A single scuffed shoe lay in the corner. Not a boot, a good buckled shoe, the kind a prince wears to sit in the second row on his mother's open day. The boy had been here. The boy had been in this crate, alive, within the hour. And the boy was gone, and the driver was gone, and the farm track ran off between two fields toward a distant huddle of roofs, and the light was beginning, at the very edges, to think about going. It was the lowest moment of the afternoon, and I have never forgotten the sound I made, a raw, useless sound, half a curse and half a sob, because Wrenfield had told me exactly this would happen, and I had not been able to make myself believe him. And now here it was, the empty van at the end of the wrong road, and the whole start we had made felt like nothing, like less than nothing, like a thing that had only carried us further from the boy. Wrenfield did not make a sound. He did not so much as sigh. He stood at the open back of the van in the failing gold light, and he looked at the empty crate and the scuffed shoe, and the scattered straw the way he had looked at the floor of the orangery, as though none of it were a defeat, but only a page, and the page had words on it if you were willing to read them. "Good boy," he said softly. I thought at first he meant me. He did not. He was looking at the straw. "Good, brave boy, look, Aldous, look what he did." I looked, and I saw only straw and one shoe. Wrenfield reached in and lifted the shoe and turned it over, and there, worked deep into the leather sole, jammed in on purpose, not fallen there by chance, was a twist of bright thread. Gold thread. The kind that is stitched round the collar of a good coat. The boy had pulled a thread from his own coat, and pushed it into his shoe, and left the shoe where it would be found. "He is a clever child," Wrenfield said, and there was something in his voice I had not heard all day, a warmth, quickly mastered. "He knows he has been taken. He is not screaming and he is not fighting, because a boy of 10 who screams and fights is a boy who is hurt or worse, and he is neither. He is thinking. He went into that cabinet to do a trick, and somewhere between the cabinet and this crate he understood the trick was not a trick, and instead of falling apart he began, quietly, so the man would not see, to leave us a road. He set the shoe down. A signed program at the yard gate, a shoe in the crate with a thread in it to say I was here, I am alive, follow. He is doing exactly what a king's guard is trained to do, and no one ever teaches a boy. He is leaving sign." "Then where?" I said. "Where did he go? There's nothing. The track goes to the farms or the river or—" "Get down," Wrenfield said, and read the ground and stop looking where it is easy to look. He swung himself down from the van and went to the mouth of the farm track on his knees again, that old gray man in the dust in his red tunic, and I went down beside him and made myself do what he did, look slow, look low, look for the thing that does not belong, and the ground gave it up. Car trucks, yes, going up the track toward the farms. But at the very edge of the track, where the grass began, a line of small footprints. A boy's shoes, no, a boy's shoe, and a boy's stockinged foot, for he had left the other shoe in the crate, going not up the cart track toward the roofs, but off to the side, down a narrow footpath through the blossoming hedge, toward the sound I now realized had been under everything for the last minute. The soft, wide, endless voice of the river. "He is being taken to the water," Wrenfield said, rising. "Of course. The river road forks, but the river does not. A boat draws no ruts and leaves no dust, and can be a mile downstream before a rider on a road can circle to meet it. The man is changing again, van to boat. And the boy, God keep him, is laying us a line right to the water's edge, one stockinged footprint at a time, praying we can read it before the light fails." He was already moving down the footpath, fast now, all the slowness burned off him. "Leave the horses. We go on foot and we go quiet. If he has a boat he has not yet cast off, or we would not still be finding warm sign. We may have minutes, we may have less. I will tell you what those minutes were like, because they were the truest minutes of my life. The footpath ran down through a tunnel of white blossom toward the river, and the light came through the flowers in long gold bars, and it was so beautiful and so terrible at once that I could hardly breathe. And every dozen yards the boy had left us something. A footprint in the soft path, a bent twig snapped and left hanging, a thing a frightened dragged child does not do by accident. Once, caught on a thorn, a torn strip of white, the lining of a coat pocket, deliberately pulled out and left. He was 10 years old, and he had been stolen out of a magic show in front of his own weeping sister. And instead of despair, he had turned himself into a trail. And Corporal Wrenfield read that trail through the blossom like a man reading the hand of a friend. And I followed, and my whole understanding of what a person could be was remade as we went. Wrenfield spoke once more, very low, as the trees began to thin and the shine of open water showed ahead through the trunks. "You asked why he does it," he said, meaning the man. "Not for hate. A man does not go to this trouble for hate. Someone paid for this, or someone means to sell what he took. The Prince of Eldermoor, alive and whole, is worth more to the wrong men than any jewel in the palace, worth a fortune in ransom, or worth a lever to move the queen herself, to make her sign or free or surrender a thing she would never otherwise give. That is what we are walking toward. Not a monster, a merchant. Which is why," and here he stopped me with one gloved hand flat against my chest at the last screen of trees, "which is why the boy is alive and unhurt and will stay so, so long as he is worth more whole. Our task is only to reach him before the boat is loosed and the water takes them where a merchant can do his business unwatched. So, quiet now, quiet as your post. And look." We had come to the edge of the trees. Below us, at a low wooden staging where the river ran deep and green against the bank, a plain flat-bottomed boat was drawn up, and a man was in it, stooped, stowing something under a tarpaulin, his back to us. He wore no green florist's coat now. He had changed that too into the rough brown of any waterman. And on the staging above him, small and stockinged and pale and utterly, blazingly alive, stood Prince Joran of the House of Harrowgate, one shoe on and one shoe off, being reached for by the man's outstretched hand, and in the last instant before that hand closed on him, the boy turned his head and looked straight up the bank, straight through the screen of trees, straight at us, as though he had known all along with the terrible faith of a brave child that if he only left enough sign, someone would come. Everything in me wanted to shout, to charge, to come down that bank roaring. Wrenfield's hand stayed flat on my chest, and his voice at my ear was no louder than the river. "No, he is on the staging over deep water, an arm's length from the man. If we startle him, the boy goes in, or the man takes him into the boat and pushes off, and either way the boy is in the water and the man between us and him. We do not startle him. We take the one thing he needs, which is the moment, and we do not give it back." His gray eyes measured the ground the way they had measured the wax of the orangery floor. "There is a fallen willow there, along the bank. It brings a man down to the water's edge behind him, unseen, within a stride of the staging. I will go down it. You will stay here, and when I am at the bottom and not before, you will step out where the boy can see you and you will call his name, not the man's, the boy's, calm and glad, as though you have come to walk him home, so that his eyes come to you and away from the water, and his feet come toward you and away from the edge. Do it well, Aldous. Do it the best you have ever done anything." And then the old man was gone, down the bank, along the great fallen willow, silent as the shadow the tree threw. 30 years of standing perfectly still turned in an instant into 30 years of moving perfectly. I had not known a big man could move like that. He seemed hardly to disturb the air. I counted him down. I watched him reach the willow's root at the water's edge, one stride behind and below the waterman, close enough now to touch the boat, and I saw him rise slowly out of the green shadow into a crouch, patient, waiting for me. And I understood that the whole afternoon had come down to whether a 3 months' guard could keep his voice steady. And I stepped out of the trees into the gold light at the top of the staging, and I called, as gladly as I have ever called anything in my life. "Joran, there you are, your mother's been asking for you. Come up now, come to me." The boy's whole face broke open. He took a step toward me, toward the bank, away from the water, exactly as Wrenfield had said, and the waterman's outstretched hand closed on empty air, and the man's head snapped up toward me, toward the red tunic and the bearskin at the top of his bank. And in that one turned-away instant, that stolen moment, the whole of Corporal Wrenfield came up out of the willow shadow behind him like the bank itself standing up. He did not strike the man. I want that understood because it is the thing I most admired and least expected. There was a boy an arm's length away over deep water, and Wrenfield would not risk a blow that might send them both in. He did the disciplined thing, the harder thing. He got his body between the man and the child. One long step onto the staging, and the old guard was simply there, filling the space, a wall of red and gray where a heartbeat before there had been open air, and the waterman found himself reaching not for a prince but into the immovable chest of a king's guard who had put himself, deliberately and without a weapon raised, exactly where the wrong could not get past. "The boy is behind me now," Wrenfield said, not loud, level as a table. "You will not reach him. There is nowhere on this river you can go that a rider cannot meet, and there are riders on every road behind me, and the alarm is a full hour old and spreading with every minute we stand here. You have lost. The only thing left for you to decide is how much worse you make it for yourself. Step down into your boat. Sit. Put your hands where I can see them. It is the last good choice you have, and I am giving it to you plainly because I have no wish to fight a man over the head of a child." The waterman was younger than Wrenfield and quicker and desperate, and for one ugly moment I saw him weigh it, saw his eyes go to the tarpaulin where I would later learn a long boat-hook lay, saw him gather himself. And I saw Wrenfield see it too, and not move and not blink, and simply be there, immense and calm and certain, a man who had stood through a lightning strike without flinching now standing over a stolen prince, and something in the waterman's nerve broke against that stillness the way water breaks against stone. His shoulders came down. The gather went out of him. He was, as Wrenfield had said, a merchant, not a monster, and a merchant knows a lost account when he sees one. He stepped down into his boat. He sat. He put his hands on his knees. I had Joran in my arms by then. He had run the last steps up the staging and flung himself at me, one shoe on and one shoe off, shaking now that it was safe to shake, the way brave people always shake only after, and I held him and I could feel his heart going like a bird's against my chest, and he was saying over and over, half laughing and half crying, "I left you the program, I left you my shoe, I left you the thread. Did you find the thread? I put it in the shoe so you'd know it was really me." And I told him, yes, yes, we found all of it, you clever, brave boy, we found every single one. And Corporal Wrenfield stood on the staging between the child and the man and did not turn round, because a king's guard does not turn his back on a threat until it is truly ended. Even to look at a rescued prince, even then. The riders came within the quarter hour. Wrenfield's stripped-down message had reached Havard, and Havard, I will say this last good thing of him, when he understood at last that the old sentry had been right and he had been wrong, did not sulk over it. He flung the whole weight of the palace at the river road and came himself at the head of it, and when he thundered down to the staging and saw the prince alive in my arms and the waterman sitting caught in his own boat and Corporal Wrenfield standing his post over both of them, the captain came off his horse and stood a moment and could not speak. Then he did a thing I have always honored him for. He took off his own captain's helm there on the muddy staging and he bowed his head to a corporal and he said, "You saw what I would not see. Forgive me, and thank you in the name of the house." Wrenfield only said, "You had the players in hand and the gates shut inside a quarter hour, Captain. That was well done, and it kept the yard from emptying, which is the only reason the ledger still had the van in it for me to read. We each held our own post." Which was generous and mostly true, and exactly like him. The waterman was taken, and the whole of the scheme came out over the days that followed, and it was as Wrenfield had read it on the river bank, to the letter. The man was no florist and no waterman. He was hired muscle, the end of a long arm, and the arm reached back to a disgraced and exiled lord of a rival house who had lost his lands to the crown years before and had nursed his grievance into a plan to take the queen's son, not to harm him but to hold him, and to trade him back for a pardon and his forfeited estates and a great deal else besides. He had studied 3 open days. He had learned the conjuror's trick from watching the Marvel brothers perform it in 3 different towns. He had placed his man inside as a florist with forged papers, and he had done one thing more, the cruelest and the cleverest. He had gotten to the conjuror's own young assistant, the girl Ninette, weeks before, with kind words and a little money and a story about a game, and taught her to slip out of the false back of the cabinet at the finish and open a certain panel, believing it was all a lark, all part of a bigger, better trick. It was Ninette's small hand that had opened the way from the cabinet to the waiting crate. She had not known what she was doing. When she understood, mid-show, that the boy was not being handed back, when she saw the crate wheeled toward the eastern door, she had been so frightened that she had run and hidden herself in the coal cellar under the orangery, which is why no one could find her, and why Havard had taken her flight for guilt. They found her that evening, cramped and filthy and sobbing, and she was not guilty of anything but being a child who was lied to by a wicked man. And the queen, when she heard the whole of it, saw that the girl was cared for and never once blamed, and I have always loved her for that as well. And the conjuror, the astonishing Corvin, who had spent the worst hours of his life under guard believing he would be blamed for the loss of a prince. He was cleared entirely, and he wept when they told him. The great foolish showman wept into his mirrored sleeve, and he never performed the Vanishing Cabinet again as long as he lived. But all that came later. On the evening itself there was only the ride back, in the last of the gold light going to Rose, with the prince wrapped in Wrenfield's own red tunic. For the old man had taken it off without a word and put it round the boy's shoulders, and rode the whole way back to the palace in his shirt-sleeves, grey and unbothered, a thing I had never seen a king's guard do and have never seen since. Joran would not ride with anyone but the corporal. He sat before Wrenfield on the saddle with the great red tunic swallowing him to the ankles, and he talked the entire way, the way a boy does when the fear has finally somewhere to go, and Wrenfield answered every word of it gravely and fully, as though the observations of a 10-year-old on the subject of trapdoors and brass casters were the most important intelligence in the kingdom, which that evening perhaps they were. The palace, when we came to it, was ablaze. Every window lit, the forecourt full, the great gates thrown wide and lined with people, for the open-day crowds had not been sent home, and word had run through them that the prince was found, and 10,000 ordinary souls of Eldermoor had stayed of their own will to see it end well. And when we rode in through the gates in the dusk, the old guard in his shirt-sleeves and the boy in the enormous red tunic and me behind them, dazed and filthy and forever changed, that great crowd did not cheer at first. They went quiet, the deep, brimming quiet of people who have been afraid together for hours, and can hardly believe they may stop. And then, somewhere in it, one woman began to clap, and then it was all of them, a sound like a summer storm coming up out of the dark, and the queen came down the palace steps herself, running, good Queen Saralind of the House of Harrowgate, running down her own steps in front of 10,000 people with no thought at all for how a queen should move. And Joran slid down off the horse and ran into her, and she went to her knees on the stone and gathered him in, tunic and shoe and all, and held him and would not let go. Princess Malin was there too, clutching a new paper windmill someone had found for her, and she wormed her way in under her mother's arm to get at her brother, and the 2 children and the queen made a knot on the palace steps that no lord or ceremony would have dared to untie, and the whole vast crowd wept and cheered and wept, and I stood back by the horses with the tears running frankly down my own filthy face, and did not care who saw them. When at last the queen rose, she did not go inside. She looked out over the crowd, and she looked along the line of guards and footmen, and she found the one man in her whole household who was standing in his shirt-sleeves in the cold spring dusk, because his tunic was wrapped around her son, and she walked to him. Corporal Wrenfield came to attention as she came. Of course he did. He would have come to attention in his grave. And the Queen stopped before him and looked up at that closed gray face for a long moment. "They tell me," she said, and her voice carried because she meant it to, "that my captain searched the players and the wagons and the whole of the grounds, and that they were not to be blamed, for it was the reasonable thing. And they tell me that one man at his post looked at the floor while everyone else looked at the box." She glanced down then at the polished forecourt stone, and something like the ghost of a smile touched her mouth and was gone. "You looked at the floor, Corporal." "The floor was where the answer was, Your Majesty," said Wrenfield. "Yes," said the Queen. "It was." And then good Queen Saralind of the House of Harrowgate, before 10,000 of her people, inclined her head to a corporal of her guard, not a deep bow, but a bow unmistakable, a queen lowering her head to a soldier, and she said, quietly enough that only those of us near heard it, "My son is alive because you did not move when the whole world was running. I shall not forget what stillness is worth, nor, I think, will he." She was right about the boy. Prince Joran would not give the tunic back. It had to be gently taken from him that night so he could be put to bed, and it was returned to Wrenfield laundered and pressed the next morning, and the boy sulked about it for a week. But something had taken root in him on that riverbank and that long ride home, and it grew. He asked from that day to be taught the things the corporal knew, not the sword and the drill, though those came later, but the other things. How to read a room, how to notice the one detail that is wrong, how to be still and watch and wait and see. Wrenfield taught him over the years, an hour here and an hour there, and I do not think it is too much to say that the man that boy became, and he became a good one, steady and watchful and hard to fool, a credit to his mother's house, was shaped in no small part by the guard who found him. As for me, I was 3 months a king's guard on the day the prince vanished, and I did not understand my own orders until that day taught them to me. Eyes on the room, not on the show. The show is for them, you are for the room. I had thought it meant only that I should not be caught gawping at conjurers. I know now what the old man meant. He meant that the whole art of the thing, the whole of duty and honor and the quiet work of the guard, is to keep watching the parts of the world that everyone else has stopped watching, the floor, the door, the small wrong thing at the edge of the light, precisely because everyone else has stopped, and because that is where the danger and the answer both always are. Anyone can watch the box. It takes a disciplined man to watch the floor. Corporal Wrenfield stood the palace another 11 years, and never rose higher than corporal, because he refused every offer of it. A corporal stands a post, he said, and standing a post was the only work he wanted. I stood beside him on a great many of them after that day, and I learned to be still the way he was still, which is not the stillness of a statue, but the stillness of a man watching everything, and it has served me and the house well for longer than I care to count. He is gone now, this many a year, but I think of him whenever I stand a quiet post on a fine day and nothing happens, and I remember that the finest days are not the busy ones after all, and that the greatest thing a guard ever does is often the thing no one sees him do, to keep his post, and keep his silence, and keep his eyes on the room, so that on the one day in 1,000 when a child goes into a box and does not come out, there is one man who was not watching the show. There is one man watching the floor. And the boy came home safe. Whatever else is forgotten, let that be remembered. The young prince vanished without a trace before 200 pairs of eyes and one old guard who would not run and would not shout, and would not look where he was told the answer was, brought him home safe and whole to his mother's arms, and asked for nothing, and went back to his post. It is the trick, you see. The boy vanishes, the boy comes back, that is the whole shape of it, and everyone in that room knew the shape, and so everyone laughed and waited for the second half, the return, the reappearance. Corvin bowed. He milked it, the showman, spreading his hands, cupping his ear for the applause. He drew the curtain closed again over the empty cabinet. He said his 3 words backward. He fired his flash of powder. He swept the curtain aside. The cabinet stood open and empty. The prince was gone.